Well, this is the TI83 Plus instructions for doing an independent samples t-test. It's also called the independent groups t-test. Now, in this t-test, no population information is given at all. We have no population mean, no population standard deviation. However, we do have two samples or two groups. So, given that we have two groups, we can then compare the means of the two groups to see if there's a statistical difference in the two means. Usually group 1 is a control group and group 2 is an experimental group, but sometimes experimental and control are difficult to determine, so this is just kind of a general statement. So first thing we need to do then is, when we compare the two means, is of course calculate the two means. We're also going to need to calculate the two standard deviations. And as you can see here, I have group 1, the control group, and with scores of 12, 14, 18, 11, 13, 14, 17, which means the n for group 1 is equal to 7. Group 2 also has a set of scores, 12, 11, 10, 11, 9, 7, 8, 11, and you can see then the number of subjects in group 2, n2, is equal to 8. We then need to calculate the mean for group 1, the standard deviation for group 1. We need to calculate the mean for group 2, standard deviation for group 2. We'll then be calculating the t, and for that we'll need degrees of freedom, and we'll need the t that we've calculated, and perhaps a t from a table. However, the TI83 Plus will calculate a p-value for us, and from that we can determine if the t that we've calculated is significant or not. Let's turn on the calculator and start some work here. So whenever you turn on the calculator, you can see it repeats just what you've already seen from the past. So we can enter stat mode. Again, press the stat key. And we do indeed want to edit, so we press enter. We now have list 1 full of the numbers left over from a previous entry. We're going to put in group 1 into the list 1. So we need to clear out these scores. And simply by repeatedly depressing the delete key, I can delete all the scores. And now we're ready to enter the first number from the new problem, which is a 12. 12, enter. 14, enter. 18, enter. 11, enter. 13, enter. 14, enter. 16, enter. I've now entered the 7 numbers from group 1. I'm now going to go to the second set of numbers for group 2 and enter those, but I'm going to put those over in list 2. So I use the scroll over bar, and I now highlight the first blank in list 2, and I'm ready to enter the first data, which is 12. 12, enter. 11, enter. 10, enter. 11, enter. 9, enter. 7, enter. 8, enter. 11, enter. I now have group 2's data entered in list 2. You may notice that the number of subjects in group 1 is 7, whereas the number of subjects in group 2 is 8. The independent samples t-test can accept unequal n's. That's not a problem. We're now ready to do the statistical test, so let's press stat key once again. Notice it highlights edit, but we want to do a test, so we're going to scroll over to tests, and now we're going to scroll down to the 2 sample t-test. You may see here it's number 4. The 2 sample t-test. Press enter, and with the 2 sample t-test, it wants to know, are we entering data? Yes, we are, from our data list. It's once again, it shows us list 1 and list 2. Well, our two groups, group 1 and 2, is in L1 and L2 lists. So we simply scroll on down. We can ignore frequency 1 and 2. We are doing non-directional test, meaning the two means are not equal. And we do indeed want the pooled variance estimate. This is talked about in lecture, and so we want to highlight pooled and yes. Once we get the highlighter on pooled yes, we can scroll on down, and we now see we have calculate highlighted and flashing. Oh, but look, we didn't pick up our pooled yes. It says pooled no. Go back up to pooled, Scroll back over to yes and press enter. That keeps it on yes. Now scroll down, calculate is highlighted and flashing, and press enter. What we see then is the little population figures about how mean 1 is not equal to mean 2. The two population means are not equal to each other. We have a t-value of 3.879. We see the p is equal to 0.00189. This is clearly less than 0.05. Thus, we have a statistically significant difference between the two means. Our degrees of freedom is equal to 13. The mean of group 1 is 14. The mean of group 2 is 9.875. When we scroll down, we'll get the standard deviation of the X1 scores, meaning the sample standard deviation for group 1, which is 2.380. Scroll down again, we see the standard deviation for our second group, which is 1.7268882. And we then get the standard error of the difference, which is 2.05. We have N1 is 7 and N2 is 8, and that completes it. Now, for your APA style reports and for graphing, what you need from this data list is simply the mean of group 1, the mean of group 2, the standard deviation of group 1, the standard deviation of group 2. And that completes this test. You are now ready to write the paragraphs and draw your graph.